Welcome to Lab Life with the Air Force Research Laboratory.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Kenneth. Hello, folks. Today we are joined by Jen Cook to discuss what it's like to be an epidemiologist and the important topic of inclusivity of women in STEM.
In 3, 2, 1.
So Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, great to be here.
Yeah, we need to clear something up right off the bat. So you're Jen Cook, spelled Gen. So you're not a general.
I am not.
Okay, I can see how you could get that a lot, especially when you used to work in our Commander's Action Group. So
Definitely, it's been confusing. I don't think something my parents predicted when they named me.
Who knew someday you'd end up in the Air Force? So
yeah, we had some commenters, so we want to make sure we got rid of any rumors. So we appreciate that.
Definitely.
Well, cool. So right now, you're an epidemiologist by training. You've been in our 711th Human Performance Wing, or Materials and Manufacturing Directorate. But what I think is most interesting, maybe to kick off for our listeners, is that as a trained epidemiologist, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. You know, we're all recording this from home. There's a really cool quilt hanging behind you. I know our listeners can't see what I can see, but not our normal lab space. What's it like to be an epidemiologist in the middle of a global pandemic?
Yeah, it's a super exciting time. So we're watching science unfold in real time. And there's just so many questions we're trying to answer all at once. So, everyone wants to know who's at risk, how does this impact my asthma, for example? What are the best treatment options? We've heard a lot in the media about various treatment options that may or may not work. Immunity, once I get it, am I immune? What does that mean for a vaccine? And then, lately we've been hearing a lot more about these asymptomatic cases, people who maybe are positive for the virus, but never show any symptoms. So, it's exciting because there's so much going on, but at the same time, it's challenging because it's like, somebody's watching over your shoulder, and, scientists and others on the front line, it's sort of like somebody's checking your work as you're going. And then, word travels fast because everybody wants to know at the latest. And, inevitably we're going to get stuff wrong because that's how science is. We try different things. And so it can be hard to kind of undo that information that spreads if it isn't quite right. Definitely.
I think what struck me the most is, kind of being a science communicator, is the power of science communication during this time. And then I think a phrase that really resonated with me was the only thing that replaces science is better science. And that's kind of where we're at. We thought that certain things might be helpful, or maybe they aren't helpful, or maybe they're not as helpful as we thought, or maybe they're even better. An unusual time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, early on, a lot of the questions that people had for me, I sort of knew the answers to because they were general questions about viruses and how long viruses live on surfaces. And while we didn't know for sure with this virus, we had a lot of good evidence and data from, other coronaviruses and previous respiratory diseases. But now my standard answer when people ask me questions is usually, we don't know, but we are learning more every day. And that's what makes it so exciting.
So are you still in communication with a lot of the either your old team or people still working in epidemiology that you're kind of working through this with, or at least getting their perspective during COVID-19?
Yeah, that's kind of one fun thing for me personally. You guys know I've been in more of a budgeting role in AFRL here recently. And so I'm not directly working on this pandemic, but obviously I have a lot of colleagues that I've worked with over the years that are, right in the thick of this, trying to figure out testing, trying to, treat patients just at the very basic level, and, working to figure out, how is this virus being shed? How long is it shed? Looking at those antibody tests. So yeah, I'm kind of lucky because I kind of get to see the fun part without having the stress of being in the thick of it right now.
But you were kind of in the thick of the H1N1 issue we had 10 or so years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, it was 2009. We had a emerging flu virus that came out, and I know you guys talked with the the flu team on a previous podcast about how, we detect those viruses and how we track them around the world. And so I think, one of the parallels I'm seeing is there was just a lot of uncertainty then at the beginning, just like there is now. And in that case, we were just really fortunate that it wasn't as severe of a virus as, we're seeing now with COVID-19.
So what was your role during the H1N1 outbreak?
Yeah, so one of my areas of expertise is biostatistics and, working with data. And so the respiratory disease surveillance system that we have, it's pretty robust. So not only do we have people out in the field taking specimens, sending them back to the laboratory to identify, what types of viruses are in them, but then they actually can take those samples and sequence them to see if there are any changes in what we're seeing circulating. Flu is a great example because it changes a lot. And so tracking those changes. And then we also collect information on symptoms. So how, if you come into the clinic and, you have a cough or fever, sore throat, and trying to record those. And so part of what I did was to try to, get our arms around all of that data and try to put it in a form that made sense to our leaders so they could understand, what they were dealing with.
You mentioned that you're working with data. So how do you feel every time you open up Facebook and Jeremy from the second grade is now a data scientist?
Yeah, we have a lot of armchair epidemiologists right now. People are getting the data. I know here in Ohio, they post the data every day on the state's website. And so anybody has access to it and you can kind of track. And, I think it's really fun and exciting that people are doing that. But at the same time, I have seen some cases where, folks who really don't have the credentials to be doing this type of data analysis are posting, predictive models, for example, or other just general graphs. And it makes me nervous. I mean, as we talked about a few minutes ago, word travels super fast right now. And so if Jeremy from second grade is, now grown up and being an armchair epidemiologist and his stuff's getting transmitted around the world, it can be concerning. That's not to say there aren't a lot of folks out there who, do know what they're doing and are posting really helpful information. I think that's one of the really big challenges right now for folks is sorting through, what do I believe? What do I trust? What's a good source?
Well, it's not memes because that's what I'm seeing from Jeremy.
Okay, well, that's reassuring.
Yeah, I have to have a shout out to my AP stats teacher in high school, Mr. Petrello, because at least I'm trying to synthesize this, and Dr. Coleman from college, but we never knew we would need stats this much in our lives as non-science majors.
Definitely. I think it's really brought awareness to the power of data and how we can pull it together to look at the big picture, which I think is one of the really cool parts of epidemiology, as well as there's so many cool visualization tools out there now. I mean, just something as simple as maps, trying to track this virus, but then all the way to, cell phone data to try to track social contacts and where the virus might have spread. So really fun time to be not just looking at data, but also finding exciting ways to present the data that makes sense.
So how are you finding it best to engage with people like Jeremy from second grade? Like if you do see something that may need addressing, do you usually reach out yourself or try to pull them aside to say, hey, this may not be totally accurate?
That's a great question. I mean, for me personally, obviously it depends on how well I know Jeremy, hypothetical Jeremy. If it's someone I don't know very well, I may just not engage because I just don't have the mental energy to fight every misinformation out on social media. But if it is someone I know and have a good relationship with, then certainly would do what you suggested, Ken, is, pull them aside and, have a conversation. I'm not into public shaming people who, truthfully, they're trying to do the right thing, and they're not out there for malicious means.
So how did you get to this point to be an epidemiologist? Were you a little kid, like the little kids out there right now watching, you had watched Dr. Amy Acton, the state of Ohio's health director, being inspired by this lab coat. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fight the virus. Was that what little Jen was thinking?
I'd like to say that I was, that focused and driven from a young age, but I definitely wasn't. I don't know. Probably if you'd asked me when I was a kid what I wanted to be when I grow up, I would have said, I don't know, a butterfly or something. So definitely didn't grow up knowing I was going to be a scientist. Found my way kind of in high school to science, and then really got deep into it in college. And what really brought me to epidemiology specifically was I was working in a laboratory at the bench level, studying proteins that are secreted by specific T cells. So it was really specific, really important work, but it was way too tiny for me. It was really hard for me to see how that fit into the bigger picture. And for me, that's really what epidemiology is. It's the study of disease at this big population level. It's not, how you or me or Ken experiences a particular disease. It's how all of us and all the people around us experience it. So that was just a much more palatable field for me.
What I see a trend in what you've talked about and how I know you, it's the strategy, and that's really, or the big picture. So that's, I guess, what epidemiology is. Or you mentioned earlier that you're doing some strategic budgeting work. You get to see the big picture and help plan, for the future for our organization.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really exciting field, epidemiology, because you get to just make such a big impact. These questions that people are asking about, their specific illnesses, that's what epidemiology does. We look and see what those risk factors are for various things. And we use the statistics to build a model that can help us determine our risk or predict it. Here, statistics like, people who smoke have this % of chance of getting this type of cancer. That's epidemiology research behind all of that, making it happen, and then being able to influence individual lives by using that big picture data.
So to help out us and our viewers, when it came to your actual teaching, or schooling, how does an epidemiologist get trained or prepared for, let's say, the future pandemic? There's obviously a lot of historic precedent in other pandemics that have happened in our history, but what does that look like?
Yeah, I guess I would say technically I have a strong foundation for pandemics, but I cannot say my school prepared me for the logistical challenges of us, being at home and just living a whole new normal. So maybe something that had to future curriculum. I don't know. But a big part of my work was on biostatistics and data analysis, as was mentioned. I learned how to write statistical code, how to merge those various data sets together that we talked about. The ability during this pandemic to analyze the data, both to track the virus and understand things about the virus, has really been key. And I think if you have a foundation in basic data analysis, you can take any type of data and work with it to answer some of these questions.
So would you encourage, other people to get into your field of work?
Yeah, it's a great time to become an epidemiologist. Public health jobs kind of ebb and flow with the times. It's one of those jobs that it's really important, and it's obvious that it's important during a time like this. But in a couple of years, when we're back to normal, whatever that looks like, we start to think, oh, well, maybe we don't need so much public health anymore. And so I think now is a great time to get on board, because there's a lot of momentum around it. There's a lot of folks that see the value in it. And I think for me, for my career, it's been really awesome because it's it's very foundational. I mean, we've talked a lot about respiratory viruses, but I mentioned, you could study cancer. I've studied, hearing loss, occupational exposures, things related to deployments, drugs. I did some work on some statin drugs, and, it's fun for me because I get to do a little bit of everything.
Any advice for people looking to get on that career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say is try it. I mean, especially for young girls, don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. I have met so many young women who have said, oh, I'm not good at math, or boys in my family are good at math, girls are not. And I found it's just not true. Don't tell yourself those lies. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. Surround yourself with, teachers and extended family members that, really encourage you to try new things. And, STEM's not for everyone, but if you haven't tried it, don't tell yourself you can't do it until you give it a shot.
So kind of going on that then, so the current state as of 2020, how do you feel about women's representation, in STEM, and kind of how that needs to change going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of areas where we can collectively do better. I mean, I've been, reading about this a lot. I've been wrapping up a study of female scientists and engineers in AFRL. And, when I say we, I don't mean just AFRL. I mean, all of us in the United States, we have some work to do. About half of college graduates in STEM are women, which is so awesome. But then when you look at those that are actually employed in STEM jobs, the proportion of women that hold those jobs drops to about 28%. And so clearly there's a disconnect there, those who want to study STEM versus those who actually work in STEM. The research shows that a lot of this is related to workplace culture or the climate. Somewhat related to that is the need to balance, our career with our family responsibilities. So I think, some of the areas we could do better are on, flexible work policies. I mean, we're living out an experiment right now on flexible work practices. So it'll be really exciting to see what we do going forward. And I'll just note, those are not specific to women. I mean, men have families too, right? So everyone benefits from work practices that allow us to balance our work and family responsibilities.
So kind of touched on the idea of diversity, but I know there's also inclusivity. What has your research study told you about that?
Yeah, I think one of the easy ways that we can sort of change the culture around this is to pay attention to the words that we use. It might seem like a small thing, but I believe that it's a small thing that can make a big difference. So, for example, some people hear the word mankind, and to them it includes everyone, but others don't necessarily feel that way. A simple change is to use the word humanity, and it's just a much more inclusive term, and it's so easy to change. Why wouldn't we make that change? But it does require us to be aware of those things. Personally, in my own life, I'm trying to use the word spouse more often instead of, a gender-specific wife or husband term. So it takes time. It takes us first to be aware, but I think it's such an easy change, and I think it makes a huge difference.
So it really made me think about kind of the first words on the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Yeah, there we go. We should have said humanity or something. We have history now to reflect on how words matter in that arena. But
yeah, definitely. I think, and words change over time. I mean, English is a living language, and so we need to adjust.
So in terms of leadership addressing this then, we kind of touched on being more not only inclusive, but giving more people opportunity to work in the workspace. What advice would you have for getting women in getting them in positions of leadership and helping change this language? What could that kind of look like?
Yeah, so one of the things our team is doing is to look at, what are those things specifically. And so a couple of the areas we've identified are in retention practices. So when do women leave a STEM job? Why do they leave? What can we do to make them feel included? And so some of the literature is really promoting a sponsorship model, which is like mentorship, but it's almost more intense, more intentional. So that's one of our suggestions. We've also seen, not just in the literature, but in our data as well, that people, both women and men, leave jobs around a 2-year mark. And so that gives us a good target to know where we really need to focus our efforts in those first 2 years. The other thing that the literature has shown is that women specifically don't get promoted because they fail at sort of that first rung up, the first opportunity for promotion. They don't get it for whatever reason. And so again, that's, early in a career, early after you've been hired. And so looking at creative ways to figure out how we promote. We might want to examine our hiring and promotion practices. Are they transparent enough? Are they unbiased? What are some best practices in other sectors that we can adopt in AFRL to make sure that we're doing things better?
And that's a term I'd heard before but wasn't quite familiar with. So with all this, actually helping with promotions and really helping this career path, it sounds like the sponsorship model could be a huge boon to that. So how is that more intensive than normal mentorship?
So one of the key parts of sponsorship is to actually promote someone. So I may mentor Michelle and say, here are some great opportunities that are available to you as a government civilian. And, if you have any questions, let me know. That would be more of mentorship. Whereas a sponsorship would mean I would know Michelle's skills very well and what she's good at, and I would be actively promoting her for positions. So if I knew one of my colleagues had a position that Michelle would be perfect for, then I could actively promote her for that type of work. And so it's just a little bit more in depth, I guess, and a lot more intentional. It does require more time, certainly on the part of the sponsorship, on the part of the sponsor. But I think we have a really great culture of that in AFRL. And I think people are probably willing to do that, in my experience.
So it kind of sounds like you have this advocate, more than just like passive, that they're active and kind of the same way you would advocate for yourself, but they may have a different network of connections or just experience to understand that how you could grow into a job based on, skill sets that you already have that you might not be able to see yourself.
Definitely. And I kind of alluded to this before, where sometimes our own worst enemy, we're not, this is true for men and women. We're not always good at tooting our own horns and knowing what we're good at. And so to have somebody there who can sort of see you through a different lens to help you see those and promote those characteristics, I think is really cool.
Yeah, you mentioned like tooting your own horn, because I either see it like in the science community, since, I'm helping communicate for them, you either see the people that are just really excel. And I mean, it could be ego, or they just get the value of communication. And then you get the other people that are so focused on doing a phenomenal job that they forget about how important it is to toot their own horn, to talk about the science, talk about what the organization is doing so that they can get recognized and grow and that science can continue.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, you've heard others in the sciences talk about this before, of how important it is to communicate. You may have the best idea in the world, but if you're not able to communicate your science, you're not going to get any funding for it, and you're probably not going to move it forward very well. And so I think that is true for both our science and for us personally, in a sense. And, I think a lot of us are really grateful for folks like you and Ken and your team that really help us package our science in a way that communicates it better.
And in your career then, have you seen that you have more mentors or more sponsors, or like how's that shaken out for you?
I think a little bit of both. Certainly the sponsorship concept is fairly new, I think, in the literature. At least it's new to me. And I've had, some really great mentors who have pushed me personally who do help me see those qualities that I have and help me find ways to promote them for myself. But certainly I've had plenty who have advocated on my behalf, and probably in some ways that I don't even know that they've done that, because I've have great people in my life. I've had great mentors at AFRL who are willing to do that in general. As I was kind of saying before, that's sort of part of our culture. And I think it's a natural extension of the mentorship work that we already do.
And you're about to go into a new role at AFRL. What will you be doing in that role? Will you be trying to, bring some of these ideas of sponsorship into that platform, or does it go outside of just your immediate team you lead?
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is we think of it as a pretty specific connotation, that there's this wise scientist who tells you everything they know and, what to do. And, I take a more open approach to what mentorship means and how we mentor one another. So certainly in my new role with a new team, I'm excited to provide mentorship for any folks that need or want it on that group. But at the same time, I hope they're not relying just on me for their mentorship. I mean, there are so many great folks out there that they can connect with. So I have a lot of chemists on my new team. I'm not very good at chemistry, frankly, and I'm not going to be able to mentor them in that way. But I do have other skills that I can mentor them on. A lot of folks in my new group are relatively new government civilians, which I've been doing this for 10 years. So that's something that I can help them with. So I think that's really the key is finding mentors that can help you with those specific areas where you need a hand or need to learn and grow.
And that's great too, because something you touched on there, I think is super important, is that with teams together, whether you're trying to mentor each other on purpose or not, there's so much you learn just by working alongside each other. And that collaboration can really give you a lot of knowledge that makes you just dangerous enough, or at least a better understanding, like for communicators, how to get their message across, saying, hey, I mean, I know a lot about chemistry, but I do get what this means now, and kind of share that with other colleagues, which is brilliant.
Definitely. And I think one of the key things that we're really embracing now is that cross-team, cross-disciplinary approach. I think in the past, we kind of worked in our fields pretty closely, and we're realizing now, or maybe I'm just realizing it now, how important it is to work with folks from other disciplines, because they have different perspectives that maybe you hadn't thought of, and different ways of approaching a problem. That can really take your science to a new level.
So speaking of taking science to a new level, a question we love asking all of our podcast guests is seeing what either a certain researcher, a certain piece of technology, or something that helped inspire you from Air Force or even just history in general to kind of what brought you to this point.
So I talked a little bit about the DoD respiratory disease surveillance system, and I know that's not a piece of technology, but I'm really proud of that program. It's run out of AFRL. It's very robust, and was mentioned on that flu podcast that it contributes directly to the creation of the flu vaccine every year. So I think it's pretty cool that we have this direct link to not only keeping our warfighters healthy, but also to help protect all Americans from illness. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. I know after we recorded that podcast, Kenneth literally ran out to pharmacy and he got his flu shot. So it really influenced him.
It worked.
Yeah, it really works. That was the year I was like, I'll just wait a little bit for my flu shot. And after that, I'm like, there's no waiting. I need to get out there. I need to get it now.
Get your flu shot.
Yes, everyone, shout out, get your flu shot every year. It's super important. But thank you for joining us. That was very inspirational, very good messaging, especially around learning about pandemics, what's happening now, learning a lot about your history. Was there anything else you wanted to let the audience know? Important shout outs like get a flu shot that we should kind of end on a good note here with?
I mean, I think everyone's probably heard this a lot, but, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So, stay at home, do physical distancing, and, wash your hands. Those are the keys. Certainly mask wearing is important as we can't social distance when we're in situations where we can't. But I just think it's so important that we follow those guidelines to help protect ourselves and our community.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us, Jen.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Make sure to follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube at AF Research Lab. And remember, stay curious.
Logging off.